Welcome to the Doggy Dojo. I'm your host, Susan Light, a Los Angeles-based dog trainer and behavior consultant on a quest to become worthy of the title Sensei of the Doggy Dojo. Right at the top, I just want to warn you, there is construction going on at the townhouse next door to me, and as we were recording, they were working right on the other side of the wall. So this means there are some construction sounds and sounds of my dog barking at the construction that I wasn't able to edit out completely. Well, welcome to real life where you can't control everything. But here we are to talk about a cornerstone topic in training. If you want your dog to be reliable in their skills, cues, behaviors, this episode is for you. If you've ever wondered why your dog can do everything you ask when you're at home, but doesn't seem to hear you at the park, this episode is for you. We're talking about something you may or may not have heard of before, the 3 Ds. I'll let my guest explain it to those that don't know what I'm talking about. She is the founder of Raintown Dog Training, a Vancouver-based dog training company made up of 6 dedicated and enthusiastic dog experts. She's a multi-certified dog trainer and counselor, and her proudest educational achievement in the field is graduating with honors from the prestigious Academy for Dog Trainers, led by the internationally renowned dog expert Jean Donaldson. In 2024, she was also honored to be nominated as one of British Columbia's top 5 entrepreneurs. Please welcome Kris Hampton. Kris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yay! We're talking about the 3 Ds. 3 Ds
That's
is
right.
something we know what we're talking about, right? Dog trainers know what this is.
Yeah.
Can you tell the people who are listening who are not dog trainers, what are we talking about?
Sure. This is one of my favorite subjects. Anything to do with training plans, I'm really nerdy about, so I'm excited. So the 3 Ds are parameters, variables, basically, that will gradually be increased during training to get a dog to reach any given goal behavior. So the most common 3 Ds would be distance, duration, and distraction. Makes it nice and easy to remember. So distance could be how far from the trainer is the dog. Duration could be how long must the dog stay. Let's say you're working on a stay plan. Distraction would be what kinds of distractions are present. So you want to start with each of these variables at an easy setting that your dog can already do. So again, taking the stay example, you want to start in the least distracting environment. So distraction's low, standing a short distance away from your dog, so distance is low, and then asking for the shortest duration of stay. And then you would slowly build them up as your dog becomes more and more proficient in any given behavior. And then also importantly, when you're raising criteria on one of these parameters during training, you want to leave the others alone or even reduce criteria on one of them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love that because I think a lot of people try to start at the beginning.
Yeah,
And they're like, tell their dog stay, and then they start backing up immediately, right? Or they start walking around them. And it's like, it's
exactly.
really important to start at the beginning.
It is, and you train more quickly that way. I think people don't realize that, and I was the same when I was a novice trainer because we get so ambitious and we just kind of train on the fly. But if you have a plan and you've got these variables and they're really clear in your head, even if your dog already has some of these down, like they can handle a certain amount of distance already, if I've got a dog that I don't know very well, I really just like to start from scratch, and you can fly through it. You can train a lot quicker if you start from the beginning and then build up slowly.
Is there a particular order that you like to work in? Because you were saying do one at a time, right? Which also
Mm-hmm.
super important. Which one would you do first?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. I'm going to quote Jean Donaldson here because this is sort of her realm, sort of the very efficient training plan. And it's something that she teaches us in the academy that I think is valuable is to start with distraction. So distractions done early for short durations and up close produces the highest rate of reinforcement. And so that rate of reinforcement, which is how often your dog's getting paid for the behavior, is really important. And if you're keeping that rate high, it keeps the dog in the game rather than them going, what she'll say is on strike for better wages. We like to use that analogy in classes.
Oh, I love
Um,
that.
yeah, so that would be the first one, and then you'd work on distance, and you'd make sure that duration comes last. So she always says, climb the duration mountain last, and that's because when you're building up duration, your rate of reinforcement, right, how often your dog is being reinforced, crashes. If you think about it, because if you're working on a 20-second stay, for example, your dog can only be rewarded 3 times in a minute, which is much less than the sweet spot we aim for as trainers, which is actually 8 to 12 reinforces a minute, ideally 10 a minute. So typically I'd work distraction and distance and keep the rate of reinforcement high and get the dog to a stronger skill level. And then I'd work duration so they can handle a bit more before going on strike.
I think it's really interesting that you're saying distractions first, because I
Mm.
always think distractions is the hardest one.
Is that
And so
right?
I always think you should add it at the end. It's like, get a nice, good stay where there's no distractions and then take it out in the world. So
Right.
but the rate of reinforcement, it makes sense when you're saying that.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? And that's where, because we want, like, our goal as trainers is to move up the training plan as quickly as we can, and but have the dog win and be really thorough. So it's kind of like this tightrope, because you want to make sure that the criteria is clear, that you're like using your parameters correctly, but you want to train efficiently. And so they've done a bunch of studies, and yeah, the sweet spot, like I say, is 8 to 12. We call it the Goldilocks zone in training, reinforces a minute. And so when we started training at the academy, we had to send in a ton of videos of us training, some of the absolute basics, but in the very clean way that sort of Jean likes it.
Mm-hmm.
And you time yourself and you go, okay, what's happening? Like the dog's, I'm losing the dog. And then you see, okay, my rate has crashed. And so with distraction, I think it depends on the kind of distraction. So I'm not saying you start by banging pots and pans, right? And I'll get into this a little bit because I'll use a little stay example for you for this. But it starts with just, holding a food like dangle in front of the dog for a second, right? And then it might be holding it for 3 seconds, and then it might be, and I know there's a bit of duration in that, but your focus is the distraction here. The duration just kind of comes along for the ride with however long the distraction takes or the distance takes. But yes, duration is, if you try it this way next time, see what you think and let me know, because I find this sort of
Yeah.
brings it up. Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, so walk us through that with the stay. So we want to teach our dog stay. We've already said we want to start with low parameters on all three. And
Yeah.
once the dog really understands that, and on a separate topic, I always say for something that has duration, you want a really clear release cue.
Nice.
So
Yeah, I
the
love
dog
that.
knows when it's over, but that would be a separate topic. But
Yes.
so
Yes.
you've started, the dog understands the concept of stay, and now we want them to get better. We want to proof the behavior, as we say.
Yeah.
Walk us through how you would do that.
Sure. I'll zoom out quickly and slightly here just to look at the whole picture of this training plan, because I think ultimately what we're talking about here is training plans, which is such a useful sort of skill for trainers and excited dog parents to have down pat. So a training plan, you describe the goal behavior, right? So the terminal behavior, let's say the dog's called Cookie and you want Cookie to maintain a down stay for 2 minutes while Kris is unpacking groceries in the kitchen 4 feet away. So you want to be that specific, because then you can see in that terminal behavior, all my parameters are in there, right? Because I've got 2 minutes, there's my duration, that's my goal. I've got unpacking groceries as my distraction, and then I've got 4 feet away as my distance. So that's all in there. And then it helps me break it down. So then I break that into those parameters, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
distance, duration, distraction. And then I use those parameters to build increments or steps. And then I train. And so if we do this with, using distraction, let's say, like I mentioned, as that first parameter to train to keep that rate of reinforcement high. When I train a stay from scratch, then it's a food dangle. So I've got the dog in a down stay, usually on a mat. That's a separate topic, but I find it useful to
Place, yeah,
already bring it in.
for sure. Yeah.
Exactly. And just have that be part of the whole environment, right? So I dangle a piece of food in front of the dog for a second. And then if they stay in that down, I feed them that piece of food, right?
When
And then
you say dangle,
mm,
so the treats I have in my pouch are small. So
yeah,
I'm like kind of like showing it to them,
right. Yeah, it
or
doesn't have to be like a
because
spaghetti.
dangle feels like, yeah, sorry, that word just confused me for a second.
That's
Okay,
very
so
fair.
I'm like, I'm teasing him,
A
basically.
little bit, but for a short period of time, right?
Okay,
Because we don't want to overly frustrate the dog, but I do believe, again, this is a topic for another day, a little bit of frustration comes in training for sure, and we've got to
yeah,
build up a bit of resilience there. So
yeah.
yeah, but just for a second. So I'm holding it in front of their nose for a second, really quick, literally like place it in front of the nose and then whip it away. And if they don't start to get up, because I'm really looking for those legs starting to get up, and that's when I would cancel the trial. If they do that, that would mean they hadn't sort of successfully stayed. But if they stay for that half second, 1 second, whatever, then I'm going to feed them. And I'm going to then increase that difficulty to longer food dangles. So maybe I'm holding it for 3 seconds, right? Or maybe I'm putting the food on the floor in front of them. I'm holding it on different sides of the dog around this mat. I'd add in walkarounds, okay? And this still to me isn't distance. Again, it all gets a bit mingly, but this would still be distraction because I'm close to the dog, and I'd work in
Mm-hmm.
1 step increments to walking all around the dog. So this is important because people train stay right in front of the dog a lot, and then they just back
Mm-hmm.
up and back up and back up. But in real life, I'm walking around the room. The dog's not going to see me. I'm going to be in the other room. I'm going to be behind them, and I still want them to stay put.
Yeah.
So I have walkarounds in there. Once the dog's successful, then I would add like actual distance. So that would be walking, let's say 6 feet away from the dog while they maintain a stay, working to walking across the room. And then if my training goal has specific needs, like in this hypothetical, right, cookies staying when groceries are being unpacked, then I add in those real life context distractions and distances, like grocery bags being unpacked, food being placed on the counter, walking to the fridge, right? Once that's all rock solid, then I would add duration and I'd work the dog up to a 2-minute stay.
And during the duration, since we're talking about rate of reinforcement, would you treat reinforce reward once at the end of that 2-minute stay, or would you try to keep up that 8 to 12 minute
Right. Okay.
reinforcements when you're adding duration?
So yeah, if I'm using a variable intermittent variable schedule to train my dog into duration, basically it's not random, it's about time on the clock. To imply it, you basically want to average out how often your dog is getting reinforced to make sure that that rate doesn't drop. So if I want to work my dog up to a duration of 15 seconds, that could look like 15 seconds, then the dog gets rewarded for staying, then 3 seconds, then 10, then 4, then 4. So the dog doesn't know when the next reinforcer is coming, and it keeps them in the game. But it isn't random. It's mathematically done so that the average means that the dog is getting rewarded every X amount of times. Does that make sense?
Still that 8 to 10, 8 to 12
Yes,
per minute.
yes.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, and then you are building up that resilience, because once you're working to, right, 120 seconds, they're going to be 120-second stretches where they're not getting that reinforcer. So that's why we do duration last, because that rate is going to completely crash at that point. But let's say you've done 120 seconds, and then after 13 your dog gets reinforced, and after 27 they get reinforced, and after 80, so you're still ping ponging it, but you're just building up that duration very slowly. And once you get to 2 minutes, you've won. You give your dog a calm, they stay, they're great. I wouldn't really try and work duration up to beyond 2 minutes, personally. In terms of like actually sitting there with no reinforcers, then I like to give them a chew toy or something like that. And then if they break their stay, then we cancel that trial and then we reset.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when you're talking about like wanting them to settle down while you're having a coffee or something that's going to be longer.
Yeah, exactly. Then you give them something. I like to work up to 2 minutes where they can really, it's bomb proof and they can stay with nothing. But once they've hit that 2 minutes, that 120 seconds, then I'm going to give them a chew toy or something like that, to keep them occupied.
Well, that makes sense. And I think a lot of people make the mistake of just going in a linear line with duration, where they're like, they do 10 seconds, and they do 15 seconds, and they do 20 seconds.
And it completely crashes that rate, because the dog's like, well, I'm recognizing a pattern here. This is getting harder and harder every time, so I'm out.
Yeah. And also they're going to start to release themselves more often than not, because they do sense patterns. That's why you really want to keep it intermittent or randomized, but not really random.
Exactly. Yeah. Randomized, but not really randomized.
Awesome. So this sounds very technical. If I'm like a regular dog parent, can I implement this, or I need to like sit down and write it out step by step by step?
Right. I'll start by saying, like, trainers, who are worth their salt will have prepared training plans, even if they're like memorized in the back of their mind from years of doing them, and know how to expertly and rapidly implement these, rather than training by the seat of their pants. And that skill is learned over hundreds of hours with hundreds of dogs. So I always recommend hiring a certified and professional trainer, even if you've got a knack for training and you love to DIY. Our job is to clean it all up and refine it with you and for you and your dog. Having said that, I love to share training steps and skills with clients, especially there's eager clients and clients who love to learn and they want to know more. And so I like to make sure they can train on their own. The degree to which I will share the technical really depends on the client. Many trainers opt not to explain this kind of theory because, like you say, it becomes technical. But personally, I do like to explain the basics to interested clients. Even in one of our group classes, we explain the 3Ds. Because it really helps, because we're training go to mat, and in that class, then we go, okay, so what's the distance? What's the duration? What's the distraction? And just sort of get that in their mind. So they have a roadmap and a structure of how to train incrementally, even if they're not doing it perfectly. It gets them further than guesswork.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the mistake that people try to make is they just try to start at the end, and they're like, my dog won't stay. And it's like, well, you mean they won't stay for 45 seconds in the middle of Starbucks.
Exactly.
While you're trying to make your order.
Exactly. Like
but
you
you
want to
didn't
learn a
train for
piano
that.
song. Exactly. And you're not going to start, with the playing the whole song from start to finish. Like you have to break it into increments. Or you want to learn a dance, you have to learn move by move, that choreography. And I say to clients, I say there's a couple things where I'm like, if there's one thing I wish that clients knew, it'd be this, but this is definitely a huge one, is about the incremental raising of the bar. It's knowing when to raise the bar. It's knowing how to raise the bar. And knowing not to get too ambitious and throw your dog into the deep end because they've been able to do a 1 second stay at home doesn't mean a 10-second stay, at the park, for example.
Absolutely. So perfect. So when do you know when to change the criteria?
Right. So this is something again that I like to teach clients. Not all trainers do, but as a helpful rule of thumb when discerning when to raise the difficulty level of your dog's training for a behavior, then I like to use the push, drop, stick method, which I'm sure lots of people have heard of. So what this means is push would be raise the criteria to the next step in the plan. So the dog's doing well, they've got sufficient mastery of the current step, so you want to move on to the next step. And then drop is drop the criteria to the previous step in the plan. If the dog isn't winning enough, right? And then stick would be you do more repetitions of the same step. You're not going to push or to drop because they're not getting enough wrong to drop, but not enough wins to push. And then there's this little sneaky one, which is important, called split. And a split is actually when one step is too easy, but the next step is too hard. So you want to insert an extra step midway between the step that's too hard and the step that's too easy. So
and is there a ratio? Like how often that they're successful?
Absolutely.
Do you push?
Yeah, so I like to train in sets of 5 for novice dogs. Some people do 10. For more advanced dogs, I'll do sets of 3, meaning how many repetitions. So 5 reps per set. So if I was going to implement push, drop, stick with 5 repetitions, right, of one step, then if the dog got 0 to 2 right, then I would drop. If the dog gets 3 right, then I stick. So if they get just over half the amount right, I stick to the same step. And if they get 4 to 5 right, then I push. So, putting that into that stay plan, for example, let's say step 1 was a 1-second food dangle, right? If out of 5 repetitions, your dog can successfully complete only 1 or 2, you would drop the difficulty, right? If they can complete 3 out of 5, then you stick with that current step. And if they can perform 4 or 5 successfully, then you'd push the difficulty to the next step. So that'd be step 2 in this case, maybe a 3-second food dangle. So you want to make sure that you have clearly defined criteria in your training plan when you're working with this system. And the reason it's so helpful is it helps us not have to do rate checks all the time. So we've been talking about rate of reinforcement, right? So instead of being like, why isn't this working? And then having to go back, watch a video, be like 1 minute training, how many times did the dog get rewarded? Is it in that zone? This system really helps keep the rate in this good zone so the dog doesn't go on strike. And it keeps us progressing fast enough so that we're reaching the goal behavior quickly and sort of keeps you in the flow of training.
Yeah, and I know this probably sounds really technical to like all the pet parents who are listening, but like it's always funny because it probably happens to you too, but my clients are always like, I don't know why you make it look so easy. They, for me, it feels really hard. It's because this is all the math we're doing in our head when we're doing a training session, right?
That's right.
And some of it we can explain, and some of it, it's harder to explain. But
yeah, absolutely.
That's why having a professional is helpful.
It's so helpful, and to get them sort of enlisted in it as well, like in classes, or even if I'm training in private sessions. If I've got a couple, I like to get like one of the members of the couple to count for me. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to do 5 reps. And I'm like, so how many did your dog do? 2? Is that push, drop, or stick? And to bring them into it, because I think for most people having this rule of thumb, and it's not so hard to learn in the basic sense of, okay, 5 repetitions, see if they mostly getting it right, push. If they're getting it wrong a lot, then drop. And if they're getting half of it right, then stick. But I find that really helpful to be like, okay, so 2 for 2, 2 for 3, 2 for 4. What do I do? Push, drop, or stick? And I find it sort of brings them into that world a little bit without making it too sort of jargony,
Yeah, I love that. You also, when we were setting this interview up, you mentioned you have 2 secret Ds for advanced training.
Yes, this is, again, all of it is credit to the academy. None of these are my own my own brainwaves. There's 2 that are really helpful as you get in, and what I love as well is they're still done in this D system. So 2 of the ones that we'd use as we get a bit more into the depths with training would be degree of prompting and degree of warm-up. So the degree of prompting is quite self-explanatory. It's how much prompting do we want to give the dog before they perform a behavior, right? So does the dog need a verbal cue followed by an environmental cue? So do I need to say, go to mat, and then let's say hand signal, actually, then point to the mat, and the mat needs to be in the room. And these are the three sort of cues, if you really think about it, that the dog needs, right?
Yeah.
Or do I want to get really specific and go, the dog's going to target their mat, as soon as I open the door, with no verbal cues or hand signals, because the mat itself is the cue. So that would be the degree of prompting. Yeah, you can kind of clean that up. Again, for most pet parents, a little bit of prompting is a-okay for the most part. Okay, say go to mat, then point to the mat, right? But that's a useful thing as you get more advanced, sort of implement. And then degree of warm-up is to do with like having the dog perform the desired behavior cold. And this one I find incredibly useful. So cold would mean sort of on the first trial of the day, or if there's been like a long gap between training, so inter-trial latency, a long inter-trial latency, we call it. So a cold trial would mean there's no warm-up. For example, if you've got a dog that loves to jump when visitors come over, that's a common one, right? You could have that the first step, the dog's hung out with the person that you're training them to not jump on for a few minutes. So it's like saturation, really. And then you do some sit practice, right? So that would be a dog that's warmed up because they've already sort of seen the person, greet them, done the few jumps, and then you go, right, sit, sit, sit. So that's a warmed up dog, right? Then let's say you want to sort of go to cool. So next time the person comes over, they only let the dog sort of greet them and be in their space for half the amount of time, right? And then you're practicing your sit, sit, sit. And then the third step, let's say the dog doesn't get to hang with the person at all before they're practicing their sit. That's a cold trial. And that's really important if you want, a bomb-proof dog that doesn't need to jump at all, especially if you've got a big dog and you don't want them jumping on kids. You need a dog that can do it on a cold trial, meaning first rep of the day, hasn't seen this visitor, brand new person, absolutely cold, they're not going to jump out. Right.
I love
go
that.
ahead.
I don't think most people think in those terms.
No, and again, it's that thing of incremental training, and it all comes under this umbrella. I love to nerd out about this because it's that thing of taking the problem out of the problem context, right? Training it and then bringing it into the problem context. But that also means, is the dog warmed up? And sometimes when you're training, your dog doesn't start off exactly where they left off last time. So you might need to ease off and perhaps drop a step and let the dog warm up into the training plan. But the goal is, especially when it comes to, let's say, reactivity or jumping if it's an issue for children. I find this with resource guarding incredibly
I was just going to say, Jean Donaldson's book about resource guarding is probably the place that I've seen this concept talked about the most.
Yeah, that's Jean.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing that I've learned, honestly, in terms of the advanced training, it's all Jean's genius. That's right. She talks about that in her book Mind, doesn't she? And she talks about it in great
Yes, because she's talking about how eventually you need a dog that can do it on a cold trial.
Exactly.
Because it's a dangerous behavior.
Exactly. And that also goes for location guarding, right? Degree of digging. So some dogs often will guard the location more if they've been lying on that bed for 3 hours versus they've just got on it. And so you actually want to put that into your training plan and go, okay, Fluffy, I open the door to the bedroom, Fluffy's on the bed for 2 seconds, and then I'm going to approach, feed, retreat, right? And then next time I'm going to let them dig in, the degree of digging. Again, it's warm up really for longer, so that one day when a stranger walks into that room and Fluffy has not had any warm up, they still have a positive conditioned emotional response to that person approaching because we've trained into cold trials. Right? So it's super important. And that's why when we do resource guarding, that inter-trial latency is so important as well. Because dogs are so smart and they're like, I'm in the game, I'm training, I'm working, I've got it, right? But what happens when you haven't trained all day and all of a sudden someone's approaching you in your food bowl? So we need to prepare for that.
Yeah. And I think the like quote unquote normal skill where I see this come up the most would be drop it, where people are like, oh yeah, when we're training and I have my pouch on and whatever, they'll drop it right away. But like if they grab something that they want, they don't drop it for me, right?
Exactly. And that's why you train backwards. You've got to take like, what can the dog do now? What's my terminal behavior? And how do I break this up into those parameters and then slowly put them back into this real life context, right? It's so important.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's a quote unquote basic concept, but it's actually where it all happens. You know what I mean? Like it's where you get the reliable behaviors.
Absolutely. Yeah. And things like that, being mindful of that. Like if I always train in the kitchen with my treat pouch on, those things are going to, I want to say it's overshadow. We talk about shadow and blocking.
Well, it becomes part of the cue. That becomes part of the antecedent arrangement for that behavior.
Yeah, not only that, it can actually block the training. Like if that smell of chicken in my pouch is so strong, the dog's thinking chicken predicts chicken, chicken predicts chicken, not when Kris says the recall cue that predicts chicken. It's actually
Right.
interfering. And so we've got to really separate all of the elements. So can I reach into my treat pouch randomly throughout the day and bring out an empty hand so that I can stop the ratio of Kris reaches into treat pouch, I get a treat being a 1-to-1 ratio. I need to sort of, you know what I mean, really get rid of anything else that can be noise in training. I love it. It's super fascinating, as you can tell.
It is. What's funny is those are not totally new concepts to me, but
Yeah.
I definitely have not thought about bringing them into regular training, like jumping being a fantastic example of that.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
cold trials. Yeah. I love
Neither had
that.
I before I learned this, and it made, like I say, just such a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Totally
absolutely.
makes sense. That's
Yeah.
great. What are the biggest mistakes you see people make? I feel like there's probably a couple.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But mistakes that I would have made and still make sometimes myself, very, very human ones. But I would say a big one, you know, they aren't specific enough. Like everything we've been talking
Mm,
about today is specificity.
yeah.
And so instead of being like the distance is 2 feet, the distraction is 2 second food dangle, the duration is 3 seconds, they kind of go, well, kind of close to the dog, hold the food for a few seconds and wait for the dog to stay for a few seconds, and it's too vague. And then how do you know when to push, drop, or stick? And so you're
Mhm.
kind of training by instinct rather than empirical data. And I'm not saying that instinct doesn't have a place in dog training, but I'm saying start with what you can observe and see and count. And then sometimes, yeah, I'm going to go, do you know what? Training plan says this, but based on my experience, I'm going to do something here. I'm going to do a discretionary stick, or I'm going to ease off this a bit, or maybe I'm missing something. But people start, everyone thinks they're a dog person, right?
Yeah.
And everyone loves dogs. We are all dog people. But at the end of the day, like, use the data, learn about body language, like get specific about this other species that you're cohabiting with, and you will train so much faster. And then you get into the zone with it, and it's fun. It's like a choreography, and you kind of get into the flow of training.
Yeah. I hope people see that it is science, right?
Oh my
Like
gosh, yeah.
there's data, there's, the scientific method. That's what kind of push drop stick is. You're kind of like testing the hypothesis that the dog's got it at this
Oh my
point.
gosh,
It's like
yeah.
it's all science. And I think that,
100%.
a certain
100%.
person whose name I don't like to say kind of gives this thing that it's all about your vibe and it's all about your energy and it's all about, blah, blah, blah. No,
Yeah.
it's really not. We're teaching a skill using
Yeah.
scientific learning methods.
Absolutely. And I think, what's funny is behind, we've been talking about variable schedules today. You listen to me try and scramble through explaining, intermittent schedule of reinforcement. Like it's very scientific. And there comes a point where even I'm like, cool, I'm so thankful that someone has written this template for me. I understand how it works, but I'm not going to explain it. I'm just going to do it. But we know it's based on maths, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to, this thing of instinct, it can be so dangerous. And behind closed doors, I could sit with trainers who are the most proficient, technical, clean trainers, and sometimes we're like, do you ever think it's weird that, like, do you ever think the dog thinks this? Or, you might be like, do you think dogs have souls? And you're gonna have those chats, or you're gonna go, do you ever think this goes against what we've learned? And that's great, and have those conversations. But I think when we're coming in, we're being paid a lot of money, to help modify behaviors, sometimes in contexts that are incredibly heartbreaking and dangerous. We're not messing around, and it's not to come in and go, I just have a great instinct with dogs. Like that can, really
Or I
come
can
to a point where a
physically
dog loses a
dominate
life.
this dog and scare it into
Oh,
submission, which
oh.
another person who we shall not say their name on.
Yeah, it does a lot of damage to the industry, and it's really frustrating. And it's frustrating when we know the science is there and the studies are there, and we can see that how those kinds of methods, dominance or force or fear, are harmful, and we actually have proof of that now. And even so, unfortunately, we still live in a culture where I think humans think they're the center of the universe and they're supposed to master dogs. And it's getting a lot better, but it's very hard to see.
I mean, we're still trying to counteract the damage of that wolf study from
That's right,
so
David
many
Meach.
decades ago
Yeah.
that it's insane that anybody still believes
Yeah,
that
David
it's,
Meach disproved
yeah,
his own, or reneged his own theory about dominance, which is where it all came from,
yeah.
and wolves, right? And yet that's not spoken about very often. And I think that, and this is something Jean says that I think is important. And I think what's his name? The OG Ian Dunbar says as well. I do think we have to look at human psychology a bit with this, because humans love a pecking order. We
Yeah.
love
Punishment's very rewarding to the punisher.
Yes, and we love hierarchy. Exactly. Actually, I heard your podcast with Susan Friedman, which I loved, and I think you said that in there, and I was like, that's very true.
Well, I can't remember who said that phrase to me the first time. It might have been Kathy Sato. I can't remember, but it just clicked. I was like, oh my God, of course. It feels good to them to punish people. And it gives me a little bit of empathy for them. It's still horrifying, but it's like, it tells me a little bit of, like you said, the human psychology of like, why would you do this?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
because for us, we're evolved to be hierarchical, and we're evolved to be like, you know, survival of the fittest. And to get ahead, people have to be below me. And so we think that dogs function in that same way. And then that's how we have to relate to them.
And also there's, the whole thought of like they're trying to manipulate me and just try to get something from me, and it's like, that's so human.
You're giving them a lot of credit.
So I mean, that's a conversation I have a lot too with my clients. So
yes, I'm sure they revenge pooped on the carpet when I was out because they were mad at me.
They
for
looked
leaving.
me in the eye and peed on my bed. It's like, I know. But anyway, so we're not making fun of people. We're really not. It's just, it's hard for us. This is why there's so much burnout in this industry. It's hard for us to constantly advocate. I come up against this, but
absolutely it is.
So that was the first mistake. I'm sorry, I got on a really long tangent.
I know, that's okay. Honestly, I think my second one is sort of the same thing I'd said. I'd forgotten about that already. I feel like we've covered it, but I basically, I was just something they do, and we have covered this, is they get ambitious or impatient, and I've been guilty of that, and they shoot ahead and they skip steps, they combine too many new parameters, and they lose the dog. And again, I did this so much when I first started until I learned it was so much more efficient to stick to the set criteria and use the parameters. And I'm not saying that like I don't train sometimes where I'm just like, I've got it, but it's because I've practiced it so often. Do you know what I mean? So I'm not saying I now go in and have written plan for every single client, because a lot of times I'm going in and replicating plans that I've used, but I will have those plans still. And you gotta get in there and just be clear. One piston at a time is kind of how I say it, like push the bar slowly, and it feels more tedious, but if you practice and practice, you'll end up training so much quicker and getting the rhythm with it, you know. And
I think piggybacking on that mistake is if the dog is successful once, that you think they did it, that they've got it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So maybe you pushed it a little too far and they did it and you're like, oh, they got it. But it's
exactly.
Once they did it once.
Yeah, and that's why that push drop stick method is great, because you can go, can they do it 5 times, and can they do it 5 times at home, and 5 times on the street when it's quiet, and 5 times at the park when it's quiet, and 5 times at the park when it's busy. Can they do it in dog class? Can they do it, you know, at X, Y, and Z? And it's putting it in all those locations and repeating.
Well, thank you so much. I think you made it really clear. It's a concept I think all of us try to explain to our clients, and to really get to dig into it like this, I think was really awesome.
Yeah, it was absolutely my pleasure. Again, thanks so much for thinking of me. And I've been loving the podcast. I've been listening to it throughout the last few weeks, and I'm learning so much myself. So thank you for doing this generally.
My pleasure. I have learned so much over the 5 seasons of the podcast. I mean, that's kind of selfishly why I still do it.
I love that.
Like, I'm learning from everybody, and, you know, I get such great feedback from like the people that are listening. So, you know,
that's great.
I don't make any money off the podcast, just so everybody knows, but it's just,
oh wow. Okay. So it's just passion project.
I actually pay money for the, you know, the services or whatever to host it. So, but it's important to me that good information gets out there. You know, not everybody can afford to work with us all the times, and I still want to be able to have a resource for people. So thank you for stopping by the dojo this week. This is your aspiring sensei, Susan Light, signing off. You can find me at doggydojopodcast.com, or I'm Susan Light LA on Instagram, Pinterest, and Facebook. The music was written by Mac Light. You can find him at maclightsongwriter.com. If you like the show, you can support it by subscribing, sharing it with your friends, rating it, and reviewing it on Apple Podcasts. Just a reminder, this podcast is intended for educational purposes only and does not constitute advice or professional services by either the host or any of the guests. I'll be back in 2 weeks with another new episode of the Doggy Dojo.